The first morning in my new home should have been peaceful. Coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise over the lake. Instead, I woke up to 3 SUVs blocking my driveway and strangers shouting that I had to hand over their property, the lake I just paid for.
They came with papers, threats, and a deadline. Either I signed away my rights, or they'd handle it their way.
Papers flying in air as Victoria shoves them at man. I had no idea then that this wasn't just about access to the water. It was about control. And they didn't know the one thing that could ruin them all.
After years of city noise, endless rent payments, and neighbors stacked so close I could hear their arguments through the wall, this house was supposed to be my fresh start. 5 acres of quiet land, a small house perched near a perfect blue lake, and a long gravel driveway that kept the world at a distance.
I'd saved for years to buy this place. Every overtime shift, every weekend side job, all of it went toward this dream. When the realtor handed me the keys, I almost couldn't believe it was mine. The air even smelled different out here. Cleaner, sharper, like freedom itself.
Inside house, unpacking with sunlight through window. I spent the first evening just walking the property line, listening to crickets and distant owls. The lake glimmered under the moonlight, and I felt like I was standing inside a postcard. No traffic, no sirens, no upstairs neighbors stomping around at 2 a.m., just peace. Inside, the house was modest. Creaky wood floors, a fireplace that looked like it had stories of its own, windows that framed the lake like a painting. I stacked the last moving box and thought about the life I'd build here. Weekend fishing trips, barbecues on the porch, maybe even fixing up the small dock so I could keep a canoe tied there.
Tire tracks in driveway, man crouching to inspect. This wasn't just a house, it was a reset button. But peace, I was about to learn, doesn't last long in some places. I'd barely finished unpacking when I noticed the first sign of trouble. Literally. A faded wooden sign at the edge of my property. Private lake access for community members only.
Close-up of weathered sign, man's tense grip on post. At first, I brushed it off, probably just an old marker from before the sale. But then I noticed the tire tracks near my driveway, like someone had been parking close to my land. And the next morning, I saw a group of people down by the far dock, acting like they owned the place. They waved when they saw me, but there was something in their smiles, not neighborly, but assessing, measuring. I didn't know it yet, but those smiles were the calm before the storm, and very soon my dream lake house would turn into the center of a battle I never saw coming. Close-up of man holding bright yellow violation notice. The first real sign that this wasn't just going to blow over came 3 days later. A bright yellow envelope sat in my mailbox, stamped with bold letters, Notice of Violation. Apparently, I was already being fined $250 for blocking community lake access. Montage of mailbox, laptop, SUV blocking driveway. I stood in the driveway holding the paper, reading it 3 times. Blocking access to my own lake? The only thing blocking access was my locked gate, which was part of my property. I crumpled the notice in my fist and told myself it was a mistake. Maybe it was automated. Maybe they didn't update their records. But the next day, another notice came, this one doubling the fine and demanding immediate payment. Then came the Facebook posts. A neighbor I'd never met posted in a community group about the new guy refusing to share our lake. The comments were brutal. People like that ruin neighborhoods. Shouldn't have moved here if he hates the community. We need to take action before he ruins property values. I wasn't just being fined, I was being turned into a villain. That night, I drove past the far dock and saw a group gathered there with coolers and fishing poles, laughing and drinking. My lake, my docks, and I was the one being painted as the problem? When I confronted Victoria about the fines, she smiled, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. "It's simple," she said, her tone sugary but sharp. "You sign the community lake agreement and pay the initial fees, and all this goes away." That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a shakedown. The harassment escalated quickly. First, more fines. $500 for refusing compliance. $750 for interfering with community access. Then came letters accusing me of code violations. My fence was too high. My driveway non-compliant with visual standards. When I ignored them, things got personal. One morning, I came outside to find an SUV parked sideways across my driveway. Not enough to tow, just enough to force me to wait. A week later, someone left a note on my truck windshield. "Sell now or regret it later." And still, the fines kept coming. $1,500, $3,000, each one threatening legal action if unpaid. I started losing sleep. Every time a car slowed near my house, I felt my stomach twist. When I opened my mailbox, I braced myself for whatever they'd decided I'd done wrong this time. But the worst came when they started targeting my reputation. A post appeared online claiming I was verbally aggressive toward children near the lake. Another claimed I'd threatened a neighbor's dog. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. Strangers started giving me dirty looks at the grocery store. Contractors I'd hired stopped returning my calls. This was more than harassment. It was psychological warfare.
One evening, after finding my gate locks tampered with, I knew I couldn't just wait for them to stop. I drove straight to the county courthouse. The property clerk, a friendly older man named Dan, helped me pull every document tied to my land. What we found made my blood boil. The HOA had filed their lake access agreement only 6 months ago, years after my property was established. And buried deep in the paperwork was a map of easements and right-of-way rights. Not only was the lake mine, so were the easements for all 3 community docks. Dan looked up from the papers and gave me a low whistle. "They've been trespassing on your property," he said. "Every time they used those docks without permission, they were in violation, not you."
I left with copies of everything, my hands shaking. For the first time since moving in, I felt something other than fear. I felt leverage. But I didn't act right away. I wanted more proof and more control. I installed cameras along my driveway and near the dock closest to my house. I kept every notice, every letter, every online screenshot. And the HOA? They kept digging themselves deeper. One morning, a truck from the county inspector's office showed up, citing me for unpermitted construction. I hadn't built anything. The inspector quietly admitted off the record that someone from the HOA had filed the complaint. Then came the final straw. I woke up to find my canoe untied, floating halfway across the lake. When I pulled it in, I saw someone had carved the word "sell" into the side. That was it. The next day, I printed copies of the easement maps and ownership records. I highlighted every line that proved the lake and the docks were mine. I didn't just want the fines to stop. I wanted them to regret ever coming after me. When the HOA announced an emergency meeting to discuss my ongoing violations, I knew exactly what to do. I showed up early, documents in hand. The community center was packed, neighbors whispering, some glaring at me, some just curious. Victoria stood at the front with a slideshow ready, smiling like she'd already won. I sat in the back and waited for her to finish her presentation. Every lie, every accusation, every inflated claim about how I was destroying the harmony of the neighborhood. When the projector flashed the slide recommending legal action, the room grew tense. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, a few whispering to each other. And when she finally asked if anyone had anything to say, I stood.
I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just walked to the front, laid the documents on the table, and watched the color drain from Victoria's face. These are county records, I said evenly. Not only do I own this lake, I control every dock you've been using. Every single fine you sent me is invalid. And every time you stepped on those docks without permission, you were trespassing. The room went dead silent. I pointed at the highlighted easements, letting the words sink in. For the first time, people weren't angry at me, they were angry at her.
Neighbors began demanding answers. "Why didn't you disclose this sooner?" one man shouted. Another asked where all the collected fine money had gone. Board members started to step away from the table, distancing themselves from Victoria. Her face flushed red, her voice cracked as she tried to regain control of the room. But it was over. I walked out of the community center that night with my documents under my arm, the cool night air filling my lungs, knowing one thing. The battle was finished, and I had won.
When I woke up the next morning, there was no letter in my mailbox, no new fines, no threats, just quiet. For the first time since I'd moved in, I felt like I could breathe again.
Within days, Victoria resigned. 2 board members followed. A new president was elected, a calm, reasonable neighbor who came to me personally to make peace. Neighbors who had once glared at me began waving. Some even apologized. Together, we drafted a fair lake use agreement, one that respected my ownership but allowed access to those willing to play by the rules. For the first time since moving in, I felt like part of the community, not its enemy.
I sat at the table with the new president, signing the agreement that would end the fight for good. The stack of old fines and notices now felt like relics of another life. And as I sat on the dock at sunset, feet dangling in the cool water, I realized something. If I had sold, if I had given in, if I had let them scare me out of this place, I would have lost more than just the lake. I would have lost the chance to stand up for myself and to show this entire neighborhood that you don't have to let bullies win. So here's my advice. If an HOA ever tries to push you around, don't roll over. Learn your rights. Keep your receipts. And when the time comes, stand your ground. Because sometimes taking back your peace means fighting for it.